Well, welcome to this afternoon's webinar on achieving borderless payments, and we're very pleased to welcome Elena Whistler, Senior Vice President of the Clearinghouse, to give our keynote presentation this afternoon. First of all, my job here today is simply to chair the event, so I'll be getting out of your way very soon and handing over to Elena, but I'm Mike Wardle, I'm the Chief Executive Officer for ZEN. Just a word of thanks, first of all, to our sponsors, who, by sponsoring these events, allow us to range quite far and wide across the fields of economics, finance, technology and innovation. We really are grateful for their support. Moving to the programme today and the bits of housekeeping. First of all, as I say, my job is to introduce and move out of the way to leave the floor for Elena. And we've got about a 20-minute presentation from Elena and then 20 minutes or so for Q&A. For those of you who have not used the GoToWebinar system before, the way to ask a question is to find the question tab on the dashboard on your screen, type in your question, and when we get to the Q&A session, then I'll field those questions to Elena and hopefully get the discussion moving. We will pass on details of people who ask questions to Elena afterwards, just in case there's any further follow-up or discussion that's needed. And I should just also say the session's being recorded today, so if you want to go back and listen to it again, or you want to refer the recording to colleagues and friends who you think you might find it of interest, it'll be up on our site within a couple of days, so that you can watch back or you can share that with your teams and colleagues. So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Elena Whistler, Senior Vice President at the Clearinghouse, and with a long career in this area. Both working both in the States and abroad. And Elena, we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about where we're going with borderless payments. The floor is very much yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, for that kind introduction, and hello to all on the call today. As Mike mentioned, my name's Elena Whistler, and I am at the Clearinghouse overseeing our industry and customer function. So how we look and how we work with all of our customers, the whole ecosystem here in the United States, where I'm based today, as well as all of our global partners and our market infrastructure partners as well. What I thought today we could start with a quick poll question to see in the audience what each of you might think about related to the top challenge in cross-border payments that you might be experiencing either individually or within the organization. So you could select one of the following. So cost, transparency of processing, weak competition, or fragmented data. I'd love to see what you guys all think as the top challenge today. So we'll give about 10 seconds for the poll to progress, and then we can see who's out there related to that top challenge. All right, cost. It's all about the money usually, isn't it? This is interesting. Cost and transparency are the top two. That's great. And we'll appreciate the activity already on the webinar today. So what I thought is, level setting and talking about, we all know about the challenges. We all live and breathe them either within our organizations on how we support cross-border payments or how we live and work on a daily basis. What I loved about this particular visual that I see up here from the CPMI is kind of looking at the challenges, but also the friction as a way for all of us to begin to take a look at how we can break those challenges apart and see, as each of our roles, what can we do and what can we take part in to making cross-border payments less challenging or less friction. So the four main challenges, again, going back to the poll, the high cost and low speed, limited access and reach, and then that transparency. So all of you thought cost and transparency are really at the top two, and that likely stems from multiple areas, right? It talks about the friction areas related to either weak competition or legacy payment processing, the whole life cycle of transactions being long, cumbersome, maybe multiple parties involved in that. And so this diagram really outlines kind of the cost, but also why some of those challenges happen, where the friction areas are, as a way for us to move forward and think about the opportunities that are to come. One thing I also want to bring up is there are many, white papers, there's many thought leadership out there related to, how do we move forward with cross-border payments and make it more streamlined. One in particularly that I'm proud to be part of, but I'm really, the content was particularly resonating, was from the P20, which is an industry voice in payments, and they regularly convene, and they convene industry and government and regulatory partners as a way to accelerate and bring progress to really challenging global issues. And so this white paper, which I recommend if you go to the payments.20 website, is really breaking down the challenges and looking at what are the best practices forward. So the top three I'll mention, and then you guys can all go out there, is one related to improving regulation and standards, one is combating financial crime, and then the other is improving efficiency on cross-border payments. So all three of those at the heart of it will ultimately make cost more effective and go down. They'll also improve transparency. They'll also improve competition, as an example. So all of these points and the best practices really help shape our roadmap going forward. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're shooting for going forward, and then the role of the clearinghouse, and then open up obviously for questions for all of you to ask, and we can opine and have a conversation. With challenges and friction points, there are opportunities. So the next slide, maybe I think about, are where are the opportunities? Where's the industry going related to that? What I found interesting on this visual that you see is FXC Intelligence, on a yearly basis, puts together kind of a heat map of all of the organizations that are involved in cross-border payments. So maybe to frame this visual that you guys see here, this is, not specific to startups or VCs. These are established companies. They have cross-border payments has to be either a primary activity or a substantial revenue line. So you will see across these, traditional financial institutions that have a large segment in cross-border payment offerings, independently owned public companies that are non-financial institutions. You also see, emerging and innovative product lines such as, distributed ledger technologies or other VC-backed growth stage companies. What you see here is opportunity. So the more logos is, more organizations viewing cross-border payments as a ripe opportunity to modernize, to mature, to offer different value-added services for whatever region they might be representing. So we sometimes view cross-border payments have been around for a really long time. They're tried and true, and that is true. But at the same time, our customer expectations are changing, choice is evolving, and what people might need now that we have kind of this global or globalization phenomenon, that needs to adapt and change all of the organizations out there. So I always find the logo slide interesting because it proves that where there are challenges and friction, there are many opportunities for all of us out there to improve the cross-border payments landscape. In addition to that, what I thought would be important to bring up as industry trends and market initiatives is four trends that help us improve cross-border payments. So the proliferation of payment schemes, meaning new payment types coming to fold. And here in the US, for example, the Clearinghouse launched the RTP network over 5 years ago. And we're really excited about seeing how the push and modernization of payments to be real-time, always on, to now overlay that with cross-border, and that's happening around the world. So many countries have real-time payment schemes or adopting ones now, and now starting to see more and more of those domestic schemes adding a cross-border element to that, depending on the definition of what the economies and financial systems might need. The other area, the other trend that is helping the cross-border space is related to the evolution of legacy infrastructure. So there has always been a trend toward, technical modernization. Particularly, we live and breathe that in the United States, as we have very mature payment schemes and payment networks. That can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different organizations. That can be a slow modernization over time. That could be a quick modernization where companies, financial institutions as an example, buy new technologies and just move forward with new and not bring legacy requirements along with. So just the way how I think our financial system as a whole is addressing new issues of speed, new demands of transparency and availability. The technology out there is really enabling us to do that, and I'm excited about that. And then the other areas around data, validation, all this is happening in real time. So just the technical ability to have more data available in real time around, the points in which organizations need to initiate cross-border payments, that trend is helping us accelerate and redefine what cross-border payments really mean and what that offering really means. And then the last one is that seamless technical integration. I think, most of us in the industry are kind of experiencing a shift into where payments are done. Prior, we talk about branch to digital to now embedded payments. We have that life cycle, and that demand is not only for domestic payments, but for cross-border payments as well. So just seeing those trends helps us evaluate what we as, the whole ecosystem and organization need to do for real time. So putting in the next slide, we have at the, I think at the, one of the highest levels and where the clearinghouse kind of takes a lot of direction from is we have global organizations are pushing for enhancing cross-border payments. So all of you that are payment geeks out there like me probably live and breathe acronyms, but if there's an acronym I use that needs clarification, feel free to put it in the chat as well, and we'll certainly elaborate further. But the G20, right? So this is our premier forum for international economic cooperation. They are a group of 19 countries plus the European Union to look across global issues. The financial system and cross-border payments is one of those areas. And so they, along with the Financial Stability Board, have developed a roadmap to help, I would say, all of us align on that North Star. So align on how we're going to enhance cross-border payments. And that coordination is critical because we all want to move together towards that. And we all know that it is hard as different organizations with our own self goals, our revenue targets, our own visions and missions that we have as companies. We might have different ones, but at the end of the day, we need the cross-border environment to be more transparent, more accessible, and more cost-effective for those involved. There are 3 themes that they have raised. So the first one being payment system interoperability and extension. The second one talking about legal and regulatory and supervisory frameworks. And then the third one is related to data and message standards. So those 3 themes have translated into 19 building blocks. And those 19, it's all available on the CPMI website for those interested. And you can play your part in that. The area that we look at as a clearinghouse market infrastructure is the payment system global interoperability, looking at ISO 20022 standards as a way for us to do that, and then working with other market infrastructure providers to begin to build those domestic networks connecting together on that. So that's what we're looking at doing, and then our participants can help fill in the customer experience, the end-to-end visibility, and as that ecosystem, we feel like we can move forward towards this roadmap challenge that the G20 and FSB have provided to us. The next slide talks about the targets itself. We have some pretty aggressive targets for as a global organization to move quickly. And the end of 2027 is that target date that we look at related to bringing wholesale payments, managing, within payments initiation within an hour of time for end-to-end, having fully access in multiple ways to enhance competition, and then transparency on that. So I know it's a bit of a visual slide that with a lot of words on it, but ultimately the goal here is across both the wholesale and the retail side of our organizations, meaning businesses as well as individuals alike, to target cost effectiveness, speed, access, and transparency. So we're moving forward and looking to do that. And so what I thought I would do for the next 5 minutes or so, talk about what the clearinghouse does and what we are trying to do to meet those global standards. And then for those out there, if you also are aiding in that, I'd love to hear your comments, and I can certainly elaborate on that. So the next slide talks about who we are. For those of you that aren't familiar with the clearinghouse, we operate 4 main payment networks here in the United States. We operate our wire system called CHIPS, our check image network called SBPCO, our ACH network, which is called EPN, and then the RTP network for real-time payments. In addition to running those 4 networks here in the United States, we also really, one of our main missions is to support financial institutions to move forward and to innovate for the next wave of what our ecosystem requires, be it APIs, embedded finance, be it visibility to documents, tokenization. So all of those are innovations that we're pushing the industry forward on. And then the other main area that we have at the clearinghouse is leading the industry on payments advocacy and policy functions. So what that means is we work with many associations such as the ABA and CUNA and ICBA and many other trade organizations here in the United States and globally to support payment issues, be it that turn into policy, that turn into regulation, or to agree on common kind of prescriptions or guidelines related to any policy. So that group is very strongly involved in cross-border payments, and a really necessary component as to what are we as an organization not only going to do technically and running networks, but also to support global conversations on anti-money laundering requirements that we might have as a global organization, our roles related to compliance, the liability involved in that, and clear delineation to that. So that is a mission of ours that we look to provide education, but also our guidance on those. We are an older organization. We were established in 1853 and really have run the test of time and moving forward. We always joke, but we seem to be one of the oldest fintechs out there, and where we continue to bring and push the industry forward on that. And then the final slide is really what we're doing in the cross-border payment space. We have a program called IXB, which is immediate cross-border. We are looking right now at connecting the RTP network here in the US with other instant or real-time payment networks around the world. And we're looking across different corridors, being with our European partners, EBA clearing. For RT1, we look across north of the border for Canada, as well as other areas in Asia Pacific, in Australia, and for the, all those interested, we focus primarily collaborating with different market infrastructures that are running networks themselves. And then what we do is begin to establish different tracks, be it technical compatibility on how we, connect those networks together. And then we look at the different rules that we have in our operating networks, be it the SLA involved to post. And then we look across compliance and other obligations that we might have now that we're connecting networks together. As part of this cross-border program that we have, we conducted a proof of concept back in 2021 where we were able to prove end-to-end technical connection and posting and moving funds within 15 seconds or less. So that is from the time an individual or customer went to a financial institution, sent a payment, all the way through to the receiving side, and money actually settling instantly at the same time as well. So for us, it's really critical not only for a payment message to move, but to have that synchronous settlement involved in that transaction. So that was an important concept in our proof of concept that we were able to prove out. And so now what we're focusing on is what are those, we're looking at kind of the different rules tracks, the compliance tracks, the different obligations that the different participants need to abide by for both inflows as well as outflows. And then we take those lessons learned and we bring it back up to the global community, say, well, in order for this to happen, we need to have perhaps better global compliance guidelines to lower the burden on some new entrants. And we look towards doing that in addition to this particular cross-border scheme. So I just wanted to highlight some of our high-level themes, where our roadmap comes from, as well as our particular cross-border program that we have, and really just the plethora of thought leadership out there in the industry as well with the CPMI, but also with organizations like P20. So I'll pause, Mike, and see if there's any immediate questions or if there's a dialogue.
Well, thank you very much indeed. A brief tour of where we are in terms of development, and particularly looking at the international architecture and how it might fit together. We do have some questions already with us, and please do keep your questions coming if you have them as we go through. But the first question is from Jim Salzman. He says that one of the things that he needs is a way to embed invoice numbers in payment link URLs, which you can do in PayPal. Is this something that might form part of the standard, or who other than PayPal provides that kind of feature to be able to embed company information into URLs? Yeah,
that's a great question. Actually, that is something that we talk about domestically, not just cross-border, right? So it's not only a cross-border problem. I will say there is this might not solve the problem tomorrow, Jim. So I'm just gonna let you know about that. But there is within the CPMI work on the data standards, there is a work stream related to ISO 20022 harmonization, and so that is that group is trying very hard to figure out if there are business practices that should be embedded in certain tags in the message to allow for that to happen across the kind of global community. So not just particular to one application or another, such as PayPal you mentioned, but across the whole. And then there are not only the business practice, but also guidelines related what to do with that information. So invoice numbers is one thing, URLs is another. There's a lot of data security involved in some of that. And so that organization kind of looks across the technical components, but also what is the business ramification for putting that in there. And that work is happening right at the moment. They just launched kind of a proposal to see, okay, can we agree on these harmonization aspects and by when? And so we're in the middle of proposing some of our opinions, collective opinions on that. So stay tuned, I guess, for more.
Thank you. And those of you who run payment systems, there's a clue as to the functionality your customers might want, which would be great.
Yes.
Dan Feeney's asked, he's just asking about what the risk process is around sort of API-led platforms that enable payments, particularly around the fintech area. He's just saying the green dot has been flagged as maybe needing more compliance work, better vetting of partners and so on. But what is the risk framework that is going to sit around this to make sure that payment systems are safe?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think maybe I'll answer it in two ways, depending on the network itself that is allowing for kind of that interoperability and interconnectedness. The first thing we look at, for example, in connecting the real-time payment network is who signs up for our network, what agreements we have with them as participants, and what do they sign up for related to our rules. And so we know all of our participants, and our participants are financial institutions, and that's kind of primary to our networks. They have to sign agreements with us, and they abide by our rules. We also have audit requirements related to that they have to internally manage, and then kind of keep us updated on their activity at an anonymized high-level data. And then as we expand, the conversation is those participants in other countries are not directly part of our network, but indirectly. So what rules do they have based upon their domestic scheme? And that's where the work right now is with the partnerships with the market infrastructure. So as a market infrastructure, we give a handshake, we have an agreement, and we know their rules, right, related to those participants. So know your customers always first and foremost, and that means, all of us too. So know your customers first, and then authenticating and authorizing that it is tried and true to us, be it API or any other method.
And I guess, again, standardization across regulatory systems is going to help.
Awesome.
I'll have a word with the FCA over here, so we'll see where we can get to. Gordon Clark says, moving on to CBDCs and how central bank digital currencies are likely to impact on cross-border payments and on what timescale. As you can see, there's potential there for quite big shifts. How do you see that developing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess I'll preface that this is my personal opinion, and not that of the clearinghouse per se. I would say each country has its own desires and need for CBDC or of some of the like. So what a country might have. The demands that China had, for example, are very different than the demands of the United States and many other countries that are doing CBDC, all relative, that be it domestic economic stability or international stability. So when we look at CBDC right now in the ecosystem that we are living in, we think of our networks as a potential on or off ramp to exchanging value. And that could be in CBDC or other forms. We believe currently the RTP network, because it's real time, it's 24/7, it's has US dollars as obviously the currency. We believe that solves the need that our economy requires domestically, and we believe the US dollar being a primary currency also facilitates, using networks such as real-time payment network to facilitate. Now, that does not apply to some other countries, right? So that's, the beauty of the world that we live in. I will generally say the conversation and the implementations of different CBDCs around the world has, I think, sparked more priority on improving cross-border payments, whether we do it with CBDC or existing networks. And that, to me, is the beauty of it, is that they've seen and shown there is friction out there without it, and so we need to solve for it. So I guess I appreciate that in each country or maybe regional network can solve with CBDC that we couldn't with legacy payment systems.
Sure. Philip Middleton's asking a kind of quite big question, I guess, in view of current geopolitical tendencies towards deglobalization. How realistic an aspiration is it that we'll be moving towards a unified and integrated global payments architecture, even if the G20 is behind it? So how does this fit with geopolitics, do you think?
Yeah, no, that's also a very timely question. And it does depend, I think, on the year, the decade that we're in, of how, borderless are we, and that ebb and flow. I think what that proves is in our conversations is that ebb and flow. And we see it in all the different payment types. So, basically, in the US, we still have checks, right? So we process ebb and flow. And depending on the needs of the ecosystem and the economy, they're going to leverage what they can. So not exactly the same, but I use that analogy to, Philip, to kind of provide your answer. There will always be, the drive to borderless in some cases, and then, more focusing on the domestic networks itself, and that is okay. So where we can provide harmony and drive towards global standards, be it policy standards or data standards across the majority of the economies in the world, that is a huge win. And so there will be exclusions depending on the geopolitics involved. And that is inherent to what we do. And maybe that's why it takes longer, because we expect a consortium and we expect a majority. But even if there are regional improvements, say in Asia Pacific alone or in Africa alone, or, I come from South America, so South America region alone, I think that itself is a program, and we can have the same North Star and then ebb and flow how global we are depending on that decade.
We're generating lots of interest here. It's great. So Chris Davids asks, how likely do you think it is that an entirely new cross-border payment system could emerge, where end users could actually use it directly and circumvent established institutions? And I guess we've seen a bit of this with crypto. We're seeing a bit of this with the idea of developing business-to-business payments, trading in crypto assets rather than trading in real cash. Where do you think we might be going with those kind of really radical systems which might leapfrog the current institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think they will come and go, if I could be blunt. I think they will solve a particular problem. I think those trends do come to fruition, and then they need stability and structure and kind of overarching sense of security in order for it to gain market share, is what I was trying to say.
Thank you very much. Jim Salzman's come back. He was the question who asked the question about PayPal and getting data. Just wondering about the possibility of looking at cross-licensing pools and whether that's something that's being looked at.
I don't know the answer to that. I haven't been involved in that area. Sorry. Maybe we could follow up.
A couple of further questions from Jim Feeney, from Dan Feeney, sorry. The first one is, have you any thoughts about sort of the big tech players, the incursions of Meta and Google, Apple in this space? Do you think it's going to make a difference? Are they going to be able to do something a bit different?
When we look at the payment space, what we see is, so we look at many layers across the payments space, from core processing, and I'm talking about central bank settlement, right, at the end of the day with financial institutions, to end-to-end customer experience. And I think some of those larger organizations are coming and acting in different functions as they go down the layer. And that is perfectly acceptable and pushes us towards moving that forward. They can flex in different geographies because there's different regulations involved in that. And I think all of that in competition, I think betters the ecosystem at large. The question is how much of that end-to-end do we want to allow those organizations to play, because that in itself ends up being their own closed loop system that just happens to be very large. So what I think we need to remember, there's open networks, there's closed networks, and some of those may seem like open networks, but that's mainly because they have large platforms with, you know, billions of individuals on it, rather than talking about, you know, very open across central bank funds. So.
Thank you. And Feeney's also asked whether you've got any advice for the UK, as he describes it, as we dither and delay in modernising our domestic payment schemes into a new payment architecture, and whether you think FedNow should be a motivator, especially between the US and the UK.
Yeah, so I don't have advice for you only because they have a lot of work in front of them. They have a lot of modernization. You know, it is hard across any country, let alone an economy that's very mature and modernized. So similar to the US, it's very difficult to move something forward. And so kudos to them for continuing on, I would say. Can you repeat the question on FedNow? I'm sorry.
Is it just any advice really on how the UK might move ahead, and whether whether FedNow kind of can be a motivator? I'm sorry, I don't know what FedNow is. I'm hoping you do.
Oh, that's okay. No, that's all right. So maybe that's a good. So I'll mention. So FedNow is run by the Federal Reserve. It is going to be a new instant payment network here in the United States. So it actually directly competes with the RTP network that we have. So we know them quite well. What I would generally say as it relates to the UK is FedNow or the RTP network and others brings validity, I would say, and brings the sense that we definitely need payments to move faster in real time with more transparency of information. We live in a world where everything is instant, be it businesses or consumers, and we need that confirmation of when payments come and go. And so FedNow is another name in the mix of the pie to validate that what the UK is doing to modernize their payment networks, to bring ISO 20022 into the fold, to bring real-time 24/7. I mean, they have with UK faster payments, but to modernize that as well, that it is further kind of confirming that the UK has the direction it needs to go.
Well, thank you very much. I think that does us for now for our questions. So many thanks for taking those. And as I said, we'll put you directly in contact with people who ask questions. So if there's any follow-up that's needed, that can be done. So a few rounds of thanks. First of all, to our sponsors I mentioned before, but we really are grateful for their support in enabling us to run sessions such as this and bring together people from across the world to discuss things which affect us all. Just looking at what's coming up, tomorrow we have a session on international financial centres and the power of art, looking at how financial centres and the art trade are working at the moment and where it might go. On Thursday, a session on seamless multi-cloud security in financial services for those of you who are deep into security issues. Next Monday, a session on infrastructure and what can we do to make us disaster-proof. So plenty of interesting content coming up. But it just remains for me to offer a huge thank you to Elena for being with us today and for sharing her expertise. Of course, if we were all together, I could offer a round of applause, but it's got to be a very small one. But really was a fascinating session, and thank you so much for taking your time. Finally, thank you to all of you in the audience and those who asked questions for making it a worthwhile session. And we will see you all very soon. Thank you very much, Elena.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.